Namaste everyone. You must have heard about Jammu. You have heard about Kashmir. You have heard about Kashmiriyat as well. You must have encountered the popular narratives on cultural, political, and legal issues pertaining to Kashmir. But what you might not have heard, but what you might not have encountered, is the wail and cry of lakhs and lakhs of people who hail from Kashmiri, Hindu, and Ladakhi population. These are the people who had been stripped of their identity, who have been pushed to face violence in the wake of religious extremism, and have been deprived of the rights and freedom that they deserve. I, Rajesh Tekle, a student of Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, on behalf of Vande Mataram family, extend a hearty welcome to our chief guest, Shri Sushil Pandit ji, members of the faculty, students, and audience. Team Vande Mataram offers deep gratitude to the frontline workers battling the COVID-19 pandemic. We wish that the world recovers soon from this challenge. The Vande Mataram Forum at IIT Madras aspires to take initiatives that introduce and sensitize the student community about India's rich cultural, economic, socio-political, scientific, and technological heritage, its ramifications today, and the thoughts about the roadmap ahead. The shlok from Ramayana, Janani Janma Bhumisha Swargadapi Gariyasi, which means that mother and motherland are superior to heaven, is a philosophy which has kept us going ahead in the last 6 years in this institute and strengthens our national consciousness. Vande Mataram, our national song, embodies the historical cultural legacy of our nation. Our national song has inherent nature which facilitates every Bharatiya to visualize and bow down in reverence to the divine maternal imagery, Mother India, and inspires everyone to perform their national duty. We have been proudly following the tradition of singing the national song Vande Mataram at the beginning of every lecture. Therefore, I request Sindhuja ji to take over and sing our national song.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sucharam Sufalam, Malayaja Shitalam, Shasya Shamalam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubhra Jyotsna Pulakitayamini, Fulla Kusumita Drumadala Shobhini, Suhasini, Sumadhura Bhashini, Sukhadam Varadam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram.
Thank you, Sindhuja ji. Now I would like to call upon our faculty advisor, Professor Ramashankar Verma ji, to introduce our chief guest.
Okay, so this is a very important show in the backdrop of Vande Mataram. As a faculty advisor, I welcome Sushil for a very warm greetings on this occasion of this 1 year 370 article implementation of Indian Constitution. Sushil Pandit is basically he has come before also, he has given lecture. He is a well-known Kashmiri activist and scholar of the Kashmir conflict in India. And he is a very profound orator in Kashmiri for the Kashmiri voice. He is the most sought after political program panelist of Indian media and the guest speaker of the subject. He has done BCom from the Delhi University and a master from the MA Chinese from JNU. And I'm very, very glad that I'm also alumni of the JNU. So I welcome you. He also teaches strategic media planning in Indian Institute of Mass Communication and National Institute of Advertisement. He has done so many books writing. I have read one of the books, and he is the co-founder of the organization Roots in Kashmir, an initiative to public awareness on reclaiming roots and identify Kashmiri Pandit, and the editor of the Prajnath, a quarterly journal. So I welcome on behalf of Vande Mataram, and next 1 hour, I think we're going to listen him, and I will request that he should ask the question in the final stage. So please, Sushil, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Ramashankar Verma ji. In 2016, we have had the honor to host Shri Sushil Pandit ji, who gave a comprehensive lecture on the issue of Kashmir and Kashmiri Hindus. The most viewed video on our YouTube channel. In August 2019, after the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, we had invited Shri Ram Madhav ji on our platform to address our student community on the topic. 5th August 2020 marked the first anniversary of abrogation of Article 370 and 35A by the Government of India. The Article 370 and 35A gave special rights and privileges to the permanent residents of Jammu and Kashmir and granted special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Today, we are delighted to have Shri Sushil Pandit ji with us to enlighten us on the impact of this legislation and what more needs to be done to address issues related to Kashmir. This talk will be followed by a brief question and answer session. So I request you all to raise the questions in the comment section on our YouTube live stream. Without taking much of time, now I invite Shri Sushil Pandit ji to deliver the much awaited talk. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rajesh. Namaskar, Professor Verma, the members of the faculty of IIT Madras, and my dear students. This is a great honor to be back with you after almost 4 years. I remember the date when I was there last. This was 29th of September. How I remember this date is when I took off from Delhi, I didn't know what had just happened because Delhi-Chennai flight takes almost 3 hours. When I landed, I saw people congratulating each other and smiling and literally celebrating. I asked what happened, and they said there has been a press conference a short while ago at about 10, where India has declared that they just made surgical strikes across the border. If you remember, there was an Uri incident which took place good 10 days back on, I think, 18th of September. After 18th of September till 29th of September, there was a huge anger building up all over the country because we had lost more than 20 precious lives of our brave Jawans who were ambushed in their sleep at night in a cowardly manner, and quite a few of them got burnt alive because the fuel, the ammunition, and their living spaces was set fire to. It was in this backdrop that I arrived at IIT Madras in order to share my views and some information with all of you. And it will remain fresh in my memory always. What we are doing today is catching up on where we left 4 years ago. And the backdrop is 5th of August, the first anniversary of neutering of Article 370. I generally do not use the word abrogation because technically Article 370 continues to remain in our constitution. What it says by remaining there is that now Constitution of India will fully extend to the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, which was earlier the state and then turned into Union Territory the next day, which was 6th of August. Because Constitution of India extended to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, that the government could take the second step of reorganizing the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories of Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir. This was an incredible decision. I must candidly share with you that I never thought in my lifetime I will see such a thing happen. Article 370 was not the subject matter of our conversation last time we met. I shared with you the glorious history of Kashmir to emphasize the fact that it is not just a piece of land or a territory for us. It is the fountainhead of our civilization, our culture, the very identity of which we are so proud, which makes us so distinct in the world we live in. There was indeed a question on Article 370 during question answer session, and I briefly touched on it. But suffice to say that Article 370 was probably the biggest blunder our forefathers committed while putting together our mistakes also that remain to be rectified, that are waiting similar political courage. But this one was probably the biggest of them all. So much so that Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, who was the chairman of the drafting committee, he refused his consent to include this article in our constitution. And when Sardar Patel as well as Gopal Swami Iyengar persuaded the Constituent Assembly on the insistence of the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, the least he could do, which he did, was to abstain from that session which included the article in our constitution. Such was his opposition. Why Article 370 was included and what was the opposition to it? I'll briefly touch that so that we speak in that context. As you all know, the process of putting together the Constitution of India was concluded on 26th of November 1949. It was at the fag end of that process, perhaps the last article to be included in our constitution was Article 370, with least amount of debate. What did it effectively do? It effectively circumcised the authority of our parliament, the highest sovereign body of our country, to legislate on the issues facing Jammu and Kashmir or rest of India, just as it did for rest of the country. The writ of our parliament was circumcised. Our parliament could legislate on every Jammu and Kashmir, barring 2-3 subjects like defense, like foreign affairs, like communication. So this was one of the biggest bottlenecks that came in the way of integration of Jammu and Kashmir. Another anomaly that Article 370 engendered was it did not allow the Indian constitution to prevail in that state of Jammu and Kashmir. Ironically, our constituent assembly and therefore the making of our constitution had the participation of 4 members from Jammu and Kashmir, including Sheikh Abdullah. They put together that constitution. They are the ones who eventually signed. It was put together with consensus, with unanimity from all the constituent assembly members representing the entire country. So Constitution of India wasn't something that did not meet with the approval of the members of Jammu and Kashmir. They approved of it, they participated in putting it together. Yet, through Article 370, they held that same very constitution back when it came to implementing it in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And this was done later. Jammu and Kashmir state wasn't only kept outside the jurisdiction of our parliament and constitution, it was also given a separate flag. Its chief minister was designated the prime minister. Its governor was called head of the state. Sadr-e-Riyasat and Wazir-e-Azam were the terms. And would you believe this? For Indian citizens from rest of the country, if they wanted to visit the state of Jammu and Kashmir, they were obliged to take a permit, just as you must take a visa to visit a foreign land. Indian Supreme Court had no jurisdiction over the state. Indian Election Commission, Indian Comptroller and Auditor General had no jurisdiction over the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Under Article 370, several laws did not extend to the state. The state had its own penal code. IPC, Indian Penal Code, did not apply there. CRPC, which is Criminal Procedure Code, did not apply there. The state had a separate penal code, a separate criminal procedure code. So in this manner, out of the Indian Union through a constitutional mechanism provided in our own constitution by our own leaders. And all this was done in the name of providing the state autonomy, political and administrative autonomy. A simple question that begs an answer is, why was such an autonomy asked for and granted? After all, India is a large country with dozens of states. Why wasn't such an autonomy given to everyone else? Now, later, this autonomy was even misused to define its own citizenship in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. They called them people with permanent resident certificates, PRC. called them state subjects. So there were Indian citizens without the state subjects of Jammu and Kashmir, and there were Indian citizens with the state subject of Jammu and Kashmir. On the state subjects of Jammu and Kashmir, Indian constitution did not apply, Indian parliament did not legislate, Indian Supreme Court had no jurisdiction, all that I've just mentioned to you. In the state of Jammu and Kashmir, only the state subjects could buy land, buy a home, buy a shop, buy an immovable property. Only the state subjects could study in the state institutions, their children. Only the state subjects could seek employment in the state government. Only the state subjects could vote for the state assembly or even panchayat. And these state subjects were arbitrarily defined as those who were living on or before 1944. And this was done through retrospective effect. In 1954, the state decided that those who lived in the state 10 years ago, in 1944, only they qualified. Have you ever seen laws being They could vote in Lok Sabha, but they could not buy an inch of land in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Even President of India, if he wished so, could not buy an inch of land in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And Jammu and Kashmir gave itself a constitution of its own. Constitution of India was promulgated on 26th of January 1950. Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir came into force in 1956. You can ordinarily to be an improvement on what was prevailing earlier. That's logical. Because then you have the hindsight and the experience to know what works and what doesn't, and what are the shortcomings left in what was put together earlier. Now, I believe Constitution of India is the most liberal document anywhere in the world. The kind of freedoms it affords are an envy of many a people, many a country around the world. Because it gives them such privileges which are not available to even the majority in India. But guess what? Jammu and Kashmir Constitution was a regression from what the Constitution of India was. It's a regressive document. It doesn't even have fundamental rights. So, when Jammu Kashmir Constitution was promulgated, an Indian Constitution did not apply. The state subjects, the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir, had no fundamental rights. Because under their constitution, no fundamental rights were. Minority did not even appear once in the constitution of Jammu and Kashmir. Forget about privileges and protections to minority. They were not even acknowledged. There was blatant gender injustice. I'll give you an example. If a woman from Jammu and Kashmir married a man from outside the state, her children could not inherit her property in the state. A woman from outside the state, even if she was a Pakistani woman, which has been the case several times, not only the Pakistani woman would become the state subject and Indian citizen, their children could happily inherit all the rights and privileges. Then there was another huge discrimination, and this was on the basis of caste. In the state of Jammu and Kashmir in 1957, there was an epidemic-like situation because the Safai Karamcharis had gone on strike. And those days, the sewage disposal system wasn't so evolved. A lot of cleaning was done manually. So things became precarious. The then Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir requested the Chief Minister of Punjab for help. Literally asked for some Safai Karamcharis from the state of Punjab. And the Chief Minister that time, Pratap Singh Kairon, told Ghulam Muhammad Bakshi, but your citizenship laws are so tough that these poor Karamcharis will be stateless. At that time, he was assured that no, through an executive order, we will confer the state subjectship on these people. So please send them quickly. And this was done. Hundreds of Dalit families, Valmiki families, from adjoining districts of Punjab, places like Gurdaspur, moved over to the state of Jammu and Kashmir and helped the state tide over this difficult situation. Now, their next generation and the generations later, with education and aspiration, wanted to move to other careers. Some wanted to become teachers, some clerks in government, some doctors and engineers, some architects and lawyers. But guess what? The state government told them that their ancestors came to the state to be Safai Karamcharis, to carry night soil on their heads, to be scavengers. And that was the condition on which they were given citizenship. If they wish to change their career, they will have to lose the privilege of being a state subject. Can you imagine this kind of discrimination in this day and age? It was practiced in J&K. And the leaders of Dalit movement in India, leaders who do politics in the name of caste oppression, went mute, dumb, and blind, did not take up their cause. So such were the anomalies that we saw in the name of autonomy in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And through such autonomy, they also unleashed oppression on us Hindus of the valley who were legitimate state subjects. Some rule of a reservation, 70% jobs and admissions would go to the Sunni Muslims of the valley. No merit, no competitive exams, no mark sheets, no rankings in the state examination board. Blatant discrimination against us Hindus. And when we complained, we were told, you have an entire India open to you. What are you doing here? Go study elsewhere, go work elsewhere. They were pushing us out of the state from the very beginning itself. And that is how our exodus started, in trickling out of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. My father was one such victim. His entire generation suffered. A lot of them went to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, we have no jurisdiction. We can just about suggest to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Seats in medical colleges, in engineering colleges, in post-graduation courses of the university. there was blatant and brutal discrimination unleashed against Hindus. Even the Dogras of Jammu and Buddhists of Ladakh were not spared. Their fair share of resources never accrued to them. They were made to cringe for crumbs and suffer as colonies of the valley. Disempowerment was made almost cast iron like grip on the politics of the state through excessive number of assembly seats in the valley, disproportionately high, and very few seats. Sure that the politics remained firmly in the hands of Kashmiri Muslims, and political power would make sure that they did as they pleased to disadvantage others and to corner everything for themselves. Why was all this done? In fact, I'll come to that question, and this question is answered right here. You know, when these issues became very well known and blatant, about 6 years ago, there was a challenge to Article 35A in the Supreme Court. Because BJP and PDP were in coalition in the state, the coalition government in the state took a position against Article 35A in the Supreme Court. And BJP in the center remained non-committal. In fact, it kept buying time. We had 6 adjournments in 3 years. Supreme Court was just not allowed to function, to proceed, because while the state government filed an affidavit saying they support 35A, they are happy with 370, there's nothing wrong, everything is fine, the central government wouldn't even file an affidavit. There was a need for central government to clarify its position, because Supreme Court had issued notices to both. And by seeking time and adjournment every time matter came up, it managed to stall the issue for more than 3 years. After the coalition government fell and Supreme Court decided to pursue the matter nevertheless, Mehbooba Mufti started warning of all the people, Supreme Court itself. She's very well known to have infamously declared that if somebody as much as touches the article, you won't find a single person to even carry a tricolor in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. She warned the hands that touch these provisions will not only be singed, the entire body will go up in flames. There'll be riots, there'll be streams of blood, she threatened. Her predecessor, Umar Abdullah, also publicly threatened that Jammu and Kashmir will have to review its accession with India if there is any review of these provisions in the Constitution of India. Can you imagine? Supreme Court is part of our democracy, is part of our constitutional order. It has every right to admit a petition and to consider it, to hear the pleas on it, to hear the arguments on it, and take a call on it. By issuing such threats, you were actually threatening the judges publicly. We all saw it, and we all took this in our stride. Our polity across the country had actually gotten used to hearing such dire threats from Kashmir from time to time. It had become normal, acceptable. Such was the state of mind when it came to Article 370. So when asked, Mehbooba Mufti very clearly said, the Muslim majority state. That is why these exceptions were created. Nobody asked her that India is a secular, constitutional, democratic republic. Hindu or Muslim or Sikh or Christian or Jew or Parsi, doesn't matter. But no, it did matter. She was for once speaking the truth. Why these concessions were made by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to Sheikh Abdullah was indeed because Jammu and Kashmir was a Muslim majority state. And because it was a Muslim majority state, and the state had acceded to India, no thanks to Sheikh Abdullah, thanks to Maharaja Hari Singh, who was the only one authorized to accede to India or decide on that accession. Yet, Pandit Nehru was for some reason beholden to Sheikh Abdullah and was subject to being dictated by him the terms and conditions once he was nominated Prime Minister. It was an unelected Sheikh Abdullah, simply appointed Prime Minister, forced to be appointed Prime Minister by Jawaharlal Nehru. Maharaja Hari Singh never wanted him to become the Prime Minister. But Jawaharlal Nehru would not send Indian forces to defend Kashmir when it was under aggression from Pakistan. So in order to save Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh was forced to sign an accession, and Nehru would not even take an unconditional accession. He would consider accession only if the Prime Minister's post went to Sheikh Abdullah. And Sheikh Abdullah came to negotiate on behalf of Hari Singh. This is how Sheikh Abdullah was first handed power on a platter, and then he was allowed to dictate terms to Government of India and the Indian nation. India was making concessions to a Muslim majority Jammu and Kashmir. But then why did you accept partition? Jinnah was also asking for the similar concessions. He did not want to be governed under the majority rule of Indian Parliament. He did not want to be governed under a constitution put together by such a majority. After all, Pakistan was demanded because Jinnah did not want to remain in India as minority. He thought Muslims as minority in India will not get a fair deal. He did not believe in democracy, where Hindus as a majority would have a larger share of power. Now, if you allowed partition, blackmail from Jinnah, why did you subject yourself to such blackmail from Sheikh Abdullah and created a Pakistan on the territory of India? Constituent Assembly was fooled by two words, temporary and transient. These two words were added in the very beginning of the Article 370 that this is a temporary and transient provision. So everyone thought, like the previous provision 369, which was temporary for just 5 years and then disappeared, Article 370, though there was no time limit set for it, will also go, if not 5, in 6, 7, 8 years. But it remained there for more than 70 years. Because nobody in India dared to touch it. A political party did put in its manifesto, election after election, but very often kept it aside for the sake of running a government. In fact, in writing, committed to not even touching it, reviewing it, for the sake of running a coalition in Jammu and Kashmir. Nobody thought that Indian political class will ever summon the courage to touch it. So a temporary provision had assumed permanence in everybody's eyes. That is why what happened on 5th of August 2019 was not just a historic or an unprecedented decision, it was a paradigm shift in our polity. I find it an epoch-changing decision. There was an India before August 5, a namby-pamby India, an India that paid ransom, an India that groveled on its knees, begging for mercy and peace, India paying a price, trying to buy peace. And after August 5, an India, a confident India, a self-assured India, growing a political spine, realize what is in its interest, what is an imperative for its survival, and doing what is necessary. If you have any doubt as to how terrible this provision was in our constitution, I will cite just 2 examples to you. On August 5, Article 370 was neutered in less than 48 hours. On August 7, Pakistan expelled our High Commissioner, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. First, he was told to leave. And then within hours, they thought that wasn't enough. We must humiliate him. So he was formally expelled. I must tell you, expelling an envoy of a country is a very, very rare instance. I don't recall in my living memory if India has ever expelled Pakistani envoy. Not when Kargil war happened. Not even when our parliament was attacked. Not when IC 816, this flight from Kathmandu to Kandahar, carried dreaded terrorists who received public reception in Pakistan. Not even when Mumbai was attacked in 2008. We knew these were 10 Pakistani terrorists. We caught one of them alive, Ajmal Kasab. And he confessed to how they were guided by ISI and retired army personnel and how Pakistani state was involved. We, of course, had telephonic intercepts. We didn't do it even when they attacked our Pathankot base. We didn't do it when they committed Pulwama and Uri. India has, I don't remember ever expelled Pakistani envoy, despite such provocations. But Pakistan expelled our envoy when our parliament, through due process, reviewed a provision of a constitution for which it is fully authorized and passed it with not just the legislative majority that government enjoys, but several other parties outside the pale of NDA supported it. Something a sovereign nation is entitled to do to its own constitution through due process as a democracy. But this is what happened. And the second example, United Nations Security Council, not once, not twice, but 3 times in 5 months. The very first time was in less than 10 days of we taking a decision. On 15th of August, on 13th or 14th of August 2019, the P4, other 4 permanent members of Security Council, rebuffed China and said, this is not our agenda, it is an internal affair of India. We have no business discussing this. Every time China went with this issue, it had to face the humiliation of resolute rejection from the other 4 members of the Security Council. Imagine whose interests was served by Article 370 in our Constitution. To our declared and avowed enemies in the north and in the west. And yet Indian political class was dragging its feet on taking a decision. So when this decision was eventually taken, the world sat up and took notice. They realized that India now has the leadership which has realized, and not only realized, has summoned the courage to alter the status quo. So everyone applauded, India celebrated, every patriotic Indian welcomed it. And you all know what has happened in the last 1 year, how India rejoiced. Because these decisions were so profound, what was expected was there would be a transformation down the line. The changes that will now be set off will not be the minor tinkering changes that touch the surface, but these will be branch and root changes, because Article 370 survived in our Constitution for over 70 years, and it needed, and it had allowed jihad to take a stranglehold of Kashmir. It had nurtured underneath an entire system of hurting India in different aspects of life, within the bureaucracy, within the judiciary, within the media and academia, within the civil society, even the chambers of commerce, a whole host of platforms, literary platforms, cultural platforms, sports bodies, Hurriyatized individuals, self-declared separatists had taken control of these bodies and were taking decisions which were blatantly inimical to national interest. It was only natural to expect now that we have taken a formal decision to dismantle the constitutional mechanism, what we have dismantled is a de jure system. Now the de facto system will also be dismantled. Has this happened? Well, I've been waiting for more than a year. I don't think this has happened. What indeed happened was, on the floor of Parliament, a grandiose declaration took place, and our Honorable President signed a few papers to give effect to those declarations. The state was reorganized into 2 union territories. So there are 2 lieutenant governors looking after these 2 union territories with a set of advisors. But that's about it. The weeding out of the jihadists from the system remains to happen. They're still there, holding on to their positions. There's no purge. There's no weeding out. There is no white paper on what they have done. There are no charge sheets. There is no prosecution. There is no reversal. Yes, for the sake of peace and order, there were preventive detentions. Big leaders were kept confined in the comforts of their plush homes. The Abdullahs, the Muftis, the Loans, the Gilanis, they were not put in jails. They were kept inside the huge properties, the most comfortable homes they had acquired beyond their legitimate means of income, to enjoy it in solitude. Raf was arrested and put in preventive custody. It was necessary because kind of threats that were issued were grave. We were promised violence. We were promised chaos. We were promised blood on the streets, and it had to be done. Yes, there were restrictions. Telephone systems were disrupted for a while. Free movement was restricted for a while. There was curfew only there are about 99 jurisdictions in the valley of various police stations. Barely, less than 10 jurisdictions had curfew for a few days. Little more jurisdictions had section 144, so people could not assemble. And that too was removed. Telephone lines were gradually restored. Internet was later restored. Schools and colleges began functioning normally. All these preventive measures were necessary, including curbs on the net, because internet and telephony was used to mobilize people and to create trouble. Those who suddenly feel that inability to share videos on WhatsApp is a violation of a fundamental right, a human right violation, must be told that life is always and every time more important than liberty. Saving lives will always take a precedence over other rights. And indeed, for more than 6, 7 months, 8 months, not a single innocent civilian lost his life or her life due to action of the security forces. I don't recall when were such 7, 8 months in the living history of Kashmir, which was so peaceful and so orderly. So obviously these restrictions made a difference. Normal life could be restored far quicker than it was done earlier when chaos was let loose, whether it was 2010 or 2016. And considerable lives were saved, because I remember after the Burhan Wani encounter, more than 100 lives were lost. In 2010 stone pelting, again more than 100 lives were lost. So I think saving lives is the responsibility of every government. Both these times, 2016 and 2010, there was a state government in Jammu and Kashmir responsible for its law and order and security. So center couldn't intervene. But this time, it was the center which was responsible for law and order. And it did very well to prevent chaos from descending into the valley. I must tell you, if even 1/10 of such measures had been imposed in the valley in 1990, we would have been in our homes. We wouldn't have had to live in exile for the last 30 years. The state abdicated from its responsibility and allowed a genocide of Kashmiri Hindus. We were brutally expelled from our homes and our lands. So when August 5 decisions were taken, we as a community also expected a great deal. After all, who else can you expect from but this leadership? So we thought that for 30 years, the government of India and the government of Jammu and Kashmir have been dragging their feet on acknowledging what happened to us. We were humiliated with a term called migrant for the last 30 years, as if we left Kashmir on our own. Somebody who took pity would call us displaced, as if we were earthquake victims or flood victims. Nobody acknowledged what actually happened to us was a genocide. We weren't targeted individually for our individual reasons. No. We were targeted as a community for our identity. People died paying a price for who they were, not for what they had done. These murders, rapes, abductions, massacres were not personal enmity or individual crimes. There was a pattern. This was genocide. But till date, Government of India refuses to call it a genocide. Number two, we thought we survivors of this genocide for the last 30 years have not been given any justice. Not a single murder, not a single massacre, not a single rape, not a single desecration of temple, not a single looting of home, not a single abduction, not a single heinous crime has been investigated, prosecuted, guilt-fixed, punished or sentenced till date. There are thousands of FIRs gathering dust. And not just that, those who bragged about these crimes, those who gloated over these murders and publicly admitted to killing people are roaming free as leaders, as icons of the society. Indeed, they were invited by prime ministers to their residence for breakfast, for photo ops, invited to civil society platforms all over the country and world to share their views on Kashmir, to make suggestions as to what should be done in Kashmir. Imagine Yasin Malik, Mirwais Omar, Gilani, soaked in our blood from top to bottom, going around as leaders and being paid heed to. So it wasn't just denial of justice. The victims were mocked. The victims were humiliated. And we thought that would reverse. That was the second issue. Third, we thought that because whenever we raise this issue about our genocide and denial of justice, a large number of people from Kashmir said, but you know, we did not have a gun. We did not do it to you. There were few people who had guns. What could we do? We were also scared. Some of them are right. After all, if somebody carries a Kalashnikov, what can an unarmed person do? But it's not the complete truth. While not everyone pulled a trigger on us, a large number of people were waiting for our exodus so that they could walk into our homes, our shops, our businesses, our jobs, our temples, our lands, our orchards, our farms. Grab them, buy them cheap in a distress sale, benefit from our genocide, profit from our ethnic cleansing. And there's a huge class of such people in Jammu and Kashmir who are sitting on and enjoying these ill-gotten gains, this wealth that they create. If a genocide has to be punished, then even those who profited from this genocide should be deprived of these ill-gotten gains. If they are not deprived, it will remain as an incentive for committing future genocides, because then genocide becomes a very profitable enterprise. How can you allow anyone to profit from genocide? So our third demand was that kindly retrieve our immovable properties at least. Our movable wealth cannot be located probably 30 years down the line. But our immovable properties, kindly retrieve it and kindly restore it. Till date, forget retrieving or restoration, not a single naya paisa compensation has been given for any home, shop, or even murder. Government of Jammu and Kashmir has been giving compensations to the families of terrorists who were killed in encounters. Can you believe this? But not to the victims of these jihadis, unarmed, innocent, non-combatant Hindus and Sikhs. Till date, not a single naya paisa compensation has been given. So this economic angle of genocide also needed to be addressed, and we were hopeful. There hasn't been any progress, not even an iota of progress on all these three issues. I am disappointed to report to you that 1 year down the line, the hopes raised by these decisions have been belied. Now, we are a very patient community. We would have decided to wait longer, and we're still waiting, of course. When you see some progress happening, when you see some visible steps being taken. But instead of progress, what we see is regression happening. What we see is one step forward, two steps back kind of policy. I noticed it on the very day on 6th of August, when our Home Minister in the Parliament was saying that the state is being reorganized, in the same breath, he said, well, we can restore the statehood to the Union territory. It is not a permanent feature. Can you afford to sound so tentative and casual? Do we make and unmake union territories and states day in and day out? Isn't this an extremely thought through decision which you can't trifle with? Won't this kind of statement be an invitation to pressure? Come with a memorandum, come with a petition, come persuade us, and we will put the state back into Jammu and Kashmir. But I heard this. I didn't want to make an issue of it, decided to keep quiet. I thought sometimes you have to say things, or sometimes in a flow, few things come out of your mouth, even unintended. Look at the larger picture and be happy that such an amazing decision has been taken. So a lot of us didn't point to this. Such mistakes that can prove quite costly. But then more things happen. You know, when China and Pakistan were raving and ranting about these decisions, India very resolutely said that this is our internal matter, you have no business poking your nose in it. And this was an absolutely right thing to say. And managed to persuade European Parliament to discuss this issue. Excuse me. At that time, our foreign minister, S. Jaishankar, flew to Brussels, and I remember the date, it was 12th of September. It was a month after these decisions were taken. He went to Brussels. And from Brussels, he repeated this, that Article 370 or reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir is the prerogative of our parliament. We are a sovereign nation, and we have done this through due process. You mind your own business and leave us alone. I was really very happy that a confident and assertive India has finally arrived on the world stage. But this euphoria didn't last too long. The very next month, I saw 27 members of European Parliament descend to India to be taken as a group to Kashmir Valley. When Indian opposition leaders were not given permission to go to Kashmir, when opposition leaders from Kashmir were under preventive detention, you were calling members of European Parliament to show them around Kashmir in the same breath as you said that Kashmir is our internal matter. What we do there or what happens there is none of your business. What credibility are you left with, or your assertions are left with, that Kashmir is an internal issue? When all and sundry European nations and their member parliaments are being shown around in Kashmir at the expense of Government of India, at their invitation to come see Kashmir and how good and normal it is. Kashmir was open to journalists from all over the country and world. People were reporting, newspapers were publishing. Wasn't that enough? Courts were functioning, marketplaces were open, government offices, private institutions, traffic on the road, everything was fine. What was the need? What was the compulsion to do this? And this happened not just once, it happened thrice. On 20th of December, various envoys in Delhi, foreign envoys, ambassadors and high commissioners were again taken on a conducted tour of Kashmir. On 12th of February, third batch on a conducted tour of Kashmir. So it showed certain amount of weakness, confusion, which was not very reassuring. Another thing happened. And note the dates. On 8th of February, it was a Sunday, a gentleman called Altaf Bukhari, who was the finance minister of Mehbooba Mufti, declares the launch of a new party in Jammu and Kashmir called Apni Party. Jammu Kashmir Apni Party. This party is made up of the rejects, discards, and turncoats from National Conference, PDP, Congress, and other sundry organizations. A ragtag coalition of dubious people. All right, well, we are a democracy, we are a free country, you can do whatever you feel like, so long as it is within the confines of our law and constitution. This happened on 8th of February. On 10th of February, independent of this event, the Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir announces elections to panchayat and local bodies. There were a lot of vacancies and says we are going to fill them up. As I mentioned, on 12th of February, the third batch was traveling to Kashmir of the envoys in Delhi. The former head of RAW, Amarjit Singh Dullat, goes in the same flight to clandestinely meet Farooq Abdullah, who is under preventive detention. Now, man under preventive detention can be met only with the consent or intent of Government of India. So obviously he was sent on a mission. I gave you 3 dates. 8th of February, launch of a new party. 10th of February, announcement of elections. 12th of February, this envoy goes to Kashmir to meet Farooq Abdullah. On 13th of February, after the 10th of February announce of elections, schedule of elections, voting, counting, nominations, etc. 13th, 15th, and 17th, those are announced. On 13th of February itself, the same gentleman, Altaf Bukhari, who has launched a new party, who incidentally faces charges because his car was found full of RDX and illicit weapons in 2018, less than 2 years back. This Altaf Bukhari, with a delegation of 24 members of his party, comes and meets the Prime Minister, and Prime Minister grants him an audience, sits with him for an hour. When you go and meet the Prime Minister, you're not even allowed to carry your phones inside. Forget clicking pictures. It is the Prime Minister's office photographers who click those pictures, and those pictures are widely distributed in the media, endorsing this party and giving him publicly his blessings. Same Altaf Bukhari and his delegation met the Home Minister on 17th of February, Monday, for 2.5 hours, and similarly, pictures clicked and distributed widely. And on 18th of February, those panchayat elections are suddenly called off. No reasons given. No explanation. There was nothing untoward in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Life was normal. Indeed, everything was peaceful. Government was right. But then why the elections were called off? because apni party is really apni party of the government of India, and they say we are very new, we haven't yet prepared, how can we contest elections, so why don't you postpone elections? So elections are postponed, they hold democracy hostage. Does that happen ever? Then on 10th of March, the detention of Farooq Abdullah is extended for another 6 months under Public Safety Act. But on 13th of March, 3 days later, he's suddenly let off, set free, unconditionally. And the man walks out to a bunch of photographers, triumphant, not apologetic, not ashamed. And we were looking at all these developments aghast. The most painful development happened on 31st of March. You may recall, entire country went into a lockdown on 23rd of March. And this lockdown was total. Government offices, private institutions, bazaars, marketplaces, airlines, railways, buses, everything was shut. Highways, aerodromes, ports, nothing moved. People were shut behind their closed doors at homes. A gazetted notification is issued by the Home Ministry of India saying Kashmir has a new class of citizens and they are called domiciled citizens. And only those who have lived in Kashmir for 15 years will qualify of a state. And what it says in addition is that all government jobs will be these domiciled citizens' monopoly. Who had asked for it? What was the need to slip this through in the middle of a total, absolute lockdown, unprecedented in our living history? Who had asked for it? I don't recall a single memorandum, a single demonstration, a single petition, a single press conference where this was ever asked for. This was nobody's demand. And what are you doing, in effect, is after dismantling a fortress-like provision of Article 370, which did not allow people from rest of the country to go to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, we thought now the strait has been thrown open to fully integrate with India. Rest of Indians can now rightfully go to the state. But within months of doing this, you've raised a 15-year big wall in the name of domicile and created barriers again. This is to re-privilege the Muslim majority of the state of Jammu and Kashmir and created barriers for integration. Tomorrow, you will extend it to the buying of property, and day after you could extend it to even voting in the assembly. Then what is left? Then Article 370 is there through the back door. So all that fanfare of dismantling a separatist system in the state turns out to be a hogwash. This is what has happened. And in that 31st of March notification, we were particularly worried because for Kashmiri Hindus, it was said that those who registered with the Relief Commissioner in Jammu while fleeing from their homes in Srinagar and Kashmir Valley will qualify to be domiciled citizens. And what about those who did not register in Jammu and elsewhere? What about those who did not register at all because we didn't want to live on government aid and relief? There was a big question mark, which means chunks, large chunks of Kashmiri Hindus expelled from Kashmir didn't know whether they were entitled to domicile or not. And Hasib Drabu, who was the finance minister before Altaf Bukhari, wrote a mocking piece in Greater Kashmir, telling us Kashmiri Hindus, you were rejoicing a great deal on Article 370's neutering. You were applauding this great patriotic government. See what it has done to you. You don't even have a claim left on Kashmir. And a lot of my compatriots were reduced to pleading and writing petitions, making frantic telephone calls because it was all locked down. It took 45 days to get a clarification from the central government. On May 16, this clarification came. For these 45 days from 31st of March till May 16, we all suffered in the undescribable agony and an ultimate perfidy from a government where we least expected it. Such have been the developments since in the last 1 year. I don't know who's dictating. I don't know why this government is clueless on what is to be done after those historic decisions of August 5, 2019. I don't know why it displays such weakness and then retreats so humiliatingly. Was the indecision of Shaheen Bagh that festered for more than 3 months telling on you? Is that why you treated Delhi riots with kid gloves? What was the reason for an NSA to go at 2 a.m. in the morning at the door of the Maulana Saad of Tablighi Jamaat to beg and plead when merely a head constable with 4 constables could have done a job? Why are we looking so pathetic and meek after taking such resolute decisions? These are the questions that have gone unanswered. And these are the worrying points that I thought I must share with you as students of a premier institution and future leaders of our country. I'm grateful for this huge opportunity you've given to me. Any questions? And if I can answer them, I'll be happy to do so.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It was indeed an insightful talk, and we hope that peace is restored in Kashmir, and even the Kashmiri Hindus are served justice. Now we shall have a brief question and answer session. Shayan Mujumdar ji will read the questions selected from live comments. Over to you, Shayan ji.
Namaste, Sushil Pandit ji. So, Professor Rajagopal has asked, why were Rohingyas given full freedom to settle in Kashmir, although they were not in India?
I am also asking this question for the last almost 7-8 years now, Rohingyas were settled in the state of Jammu and Kashmir in December of 2012 and January of 2013. Umar Abdullah was the chief minister and Manmohan Singh was the prime minister. And they didn't come in ones or twos or hundreds or 200s or 1,000 or 2,000. 30 to 40,000 Rohingyas arrived from more than 3,500 kilometers away, jumping a country in between called Bangladesh and crossing more than 9 states on their way to Jammu and Kashmir. And they were provided land, they were provided electricity and water connections. I thought these governments who enabled it were probably very lax and insensitive about national security, because these Rohingyas have been put up near an army camp called Sunjwan Army Camp, and this army camp has had more than 6 terrible attacks from jihadis over the last few years. This place is less than 50 kilometers as the crow flies from the LOC. How could you do this? But this was done. I thought in the last 6-7 years, with a change in government, we would see some of these Rohingyas taken away back to where they belong, or at least removed from there, such sensitive geography. Not one has been removed. In fact, more have come. They have got Aadhaar cards done. Some of them have opened bank accounts. They are running bazaars there. It is our misfortune and this country's put to grave risk by not reversing this policy. I thought government would put together a white paper on those politicians and bureaucrats who enabled it. We still are groping in the dark as to how did this happen? How was it allowed? So I'm as curious, Professor, as you are. I've been asking these questions. There are no answers.
Sir, you told us about the clarification you received from Government of India regarding that issue. So can you elaborate us on this?
Which clarification?
You told about that there was some tension in the Kashmiri and the people after the notification came out on the domicile and the issues.
No. We didn't receive any clarification. Relief Commissioner from Jammu issued a notice 45 days later saying that other Kashmiri Hindus who did not apply in the last 30 years must now apply online and prove their credentials in order to become the domicile citizens. Imagine, we did not have to prove so far about our credentials, about our identity. Now there is a process in which we have to now prove our credentials, prove our claim to be the residents of Jammu and Kashmir. You know, domicile law, I must inform you, is something that is we are no stranger to this provision across the country. Domicile is a legitimate mechanism in order to protect the interest of such sparse, thinly spread populations in those sensitive geographies where you expect a demographic destabilization, where you expect the balance of population to go awry if these safeguards are not kept. Now, nobody is queuing up to get into Jammu and Kashmir because it's a disturbed area. Actually, people are fleeing from there. And if you raise such huge barriers, you are not safeguarding Jammu and Kashmir. You are actually keeping it away from rest of India. According to the norms of domicile, if any territory needed such provisions, it was the territory of Ladakh. And I'll tell you why. The Union Territory of Ladakh is at least 20% bigger in area than the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. And the population of Ladakh is not even 10% of Jammu and Kashmir. The third factor, it is only in Ladakh that India finds its both adversaries, China and Pakistan, together. In no other geography do we face both our enemies together. So if at all provisions of domicile were needed, they were needed in Ladakh. And they are yet to announce, it's more than a year, there is no domicile policy for Ladakh. But there is a domicile provision for the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So, another issue, how is domicile policy practiced in rest of India? In the neighboring Punjab, the domicile requirement is of 0 years. You want a domicile certificate, you can go to a sarpanch or a tehsildar or a subdivisional magistrate, say I am staying here, they will verify your address, whether it is rent. You can use for whichever purpose you want. You don't need to spend even 1 year there. Likewise in Chhattisgarh, likewise in Telangana or Meghalaya, 0 years of domicile is required. In Odisha, which is again a very poor state, only 1 year of domicile is required. In Delhi, UP and Bihar, only 3 years of domicile is required. In Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, only 5 years of domicile is required. In Andhra, only 6 years of domicile is required. In Rajasthan and Gujarat, only 10 years of domicile is required. In Jammu and Kashmir, you've just rescued it from the clutches of Article 370, and you give a 15-year domicile within months. You don't want rest of the India to go there. It beats all reason. So I find this policy bizarre. And because this was not done keeping us in mind, on 31st of March, it disadvantaged a large chunk of Kashmiri Hindus who were almost deprived of their right to domicile citizenship of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chirag has put forward this question. What is the best way forward for us as a society, politicians, to ensure that Kashmir comes back to its true identity, with all the actual Kashmiri pandits resettled back to their home without fearing any backlash from terrorists?
You're absolutely right. Today, there is a lot of fear of backlash, and that is there because we haven't done what was needed to be done. First of all, we have whitewashed the genocide. We have denied the genocide. Unless you acknowledge this genocide, where will the confidence come from among the victims and survivors who you expect to go back to their homes? You're unwilling to even accept what happened. How will they trust you that for their security and safety and your assurance that such things will not be repeated? Number two, there's no justice. People who killed us, who massacred us, who chased us out are roaming free. It is humiliating to even think about going back in the same place where they are lording over as social icons, as political leaders, as symbols of authority. And number three, there are people who are still enjoying the properties they grabbed from us. Won't they be again tempted to grab our properties a couple of generations down the line? So none of those things have happened which would give us confidence. Unless you punish genociders, they will always be willing to shed more blood, kill more of us. I expect at least the prominent ones among them to be hung by the nearest street pole so that there is an example made out of them. That if you kill innocent, unarmed Hindus in Kashmir again, this is going to be your fate. Unless these things are done, unless our genocide is acknowledged, unless justice is served, unless our immovable properties are restored to our rightful owners, unless distress sale deeds are cancelled, compensation given, and one place settlement for Kashmiri Hindus where we can defend ourselves, where we can raise our community, where we can rebuild our lives with confidence and with security for our future generations. Even talk about this is an anathema, is humiliating. Thank you.
Pandit ji, what is your idea of bringing normalcy in Jammu and in the Indian territories of Jammu and Kashmir? What are your views on that?
You see, normalcy is the removal of abnormalcy. The abnormalcy in Jammu and Kashmir is that people of dubious backgrounds and pernicious ideologies are still rooted them. We still hope and pray that they will restart the democratic process in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. We are repackaging the same discredited and dubious lot into new messiahs. You must have heard an IAS officer who was somehow manipulated to become the topper of the UPSC exam in order to create an icon in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and a public relation coup. That man left India for US on a sabbatical. He was on leave, government salary, and from there he tweeted and called India Rapistan. And then he resigned from his job, came back, started a new political party, and in his press conferences said the aspirations of Kashmiris will have to be accommodated outside the Constitution of India. Said this. That man, a few days back, says, I have deleted all my tweets. I am resigning from my political party. I am disowning all that I said in the past, and I am ready to resume my life. And Government of India, which has not accepted his resignation so far, all these months have kept his resignation in abeyance, I'm told, is considering reinstating him. Now, this is abominable. What are you doing? What kind of precedents are you setting? Now, things like these, compromises like these, concessions like these, deals like these, you've been doing with Hurriyat over the last 30 years, spending hundreds of crores, giving them state security, paying for their hotel bills, treating them on Indian taxpayers' money, pleading for their visas with the governments across the world, allowing them a free run in the hope that you will win their hearts and minds. And they will carry a tricolor to Lal Chowk and say Vande Mataram and Bharat Mata ki Jai. Now this cuckoo thinking is the abnormality in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. No normal state will ever do this. No normal self-respecting government would ever do this. So if you stop all this, you will see beginning of normalcy returning.
Sir, this is the last question from our side. So Akshay Patra asked, he is from Odisha, that in UPSC Civil Service Exam 2021, why Kashmiri language and literature optional paper is allowed to be written only in Persian script? Why not in Sharda script? What is your take on this matter?
Yeah, so this is, this is about winning hearts and minds. You may have noticed that a lot of people respond with great deal of enthusiastic applause when more and more people of a certain identity take to UPSC and they think this is going to give us the certificates of how secular we are, how inclusive we are, how liberal we are, and never mind what kind of system is preparing them to crack these competitive exams, which endowments, which trusts, what kind of training, what kind of elements are preparing them to get into your system and subvert it from within. You already have an example of a former UPSC topper from Kashmir and what he did. You are encouraging more and more people to the disadvantage of others. Now, Kashmiri language was and remains one of the oldest and richest languages of India. It found mention in the first list of 14 languages in the 8th schedule of our constitution when our constitution was put together. The very first list of 14 languages in the 8th schedule included Kashmiri. Over the 4 occasions, 8 more languages were added, and today there are 22 languages in our 8th schedule. But the original list of 14 languages had Kashmiri. Even then, it was in Persian script. The original script of this language has been Sharda. Sharda is out of circulation. But would you know, even Kashmiri has never been taught. Language which has not been taught in any school by any state. There haven't been textbooks. There haven't been teachers. There haven't been courses. There haven't been examinations in Kashmiri. On the other hand, Kashmiri was discouraged and replaced by Urdu. The state of Jammu and Kashmir chose Urdu. Urdu had nothing to do with Kashmir. Urdu was born between Delhi and Lucknow via Farrukhabad and Agra. This is the corridor in which Urdu was born and flourished. But Jammu and Kashmir decided to kill its own language to adopt Urdu. For those of you who do not know, Urdu was the tool of mobilization for the partition of India. Because a language is an important marker of any identity, and partition of India was sought based on identity, Muslim identity. And since identity must have a language, Urdu was adopted as the language of such an identity. So Urdu has very potent political Pakistan secessionist movement in Kashmir Urdu is one of the bridges that joins it with Pakistan. Urdu is the only state where Urdu is the principal language, is Jammu and Kashmir, in the entire country. So now you know how this is being steered, and those who will write their papers in Kashmiri, in Nastaliq script in which Urdu is written, who will be the examiners, and how will they be given scores, and how it will affect the overall results. So it's a no-brainer. It's an elaborate system of privileging and advantaging a section in the hope that they will feel grateful and become patriots overnight. This such woolly-headed thinking is guiding our decisions, our policies. No state interested in self-preservation would ever allow open its innards, open its sanctum sanctorum, its steel frame bureaucracy to be infiltrated in this manner. Erosion from within. Thank you for this question.
Can I share something with you guys, just for a minute?
Sir.
Rajesh, can I
Sure,
share?
sir. Sure, sir.
The thing's IAS officer who resigned and he want to come back and join IAS, it is really ironic in India. I remember when I resigned from my previous job, and after 2 months I wanted to go back again. I was refused because this was a national institute. He said, no, you cannot come back. And now this IAS officer who is coming after 2 years, having done so much grace to the country, again government of India is taking it. And you know who was the director? He was a Kashmiri director who was there in that place. So one should not say anything. Everybody who has a power, they do it. They manipulate the system. That's what I want to share.
Thank you, Verma sir. Thank you, Sushil Pandit ji, for answering our questions. I request the audience to give their feedback through the feedback form shared in the comment section of the YouTube live stream. I express the sincerest gratitude to Shri Sushil Pandit ji for this wonderful talk. We are grateful to you for coming to our platform and connecting with us live. I would like to thank our viewers joining us live and supporting us, our IIT Madras faculty, students, administration, our Vande Mataram volunteers, and our faculty advisor, Professor Ramashankar Verma sir. At last, I would like to thank our alumni of IIT Madras family for unconditional love and support that you have been giving us for the last 6 years. Now I request Sindhuja ji to conclude this session with the national anthem.
I think we should clap 5 people for him. He has done a wonderful job. So much knowledgeable things you said. I think
Thank you so much.
it really is an eye-opener for the policies, how the government of India is doing it. I think this is the one of the things people should know it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Over to you, Sindhuja ji.
Thank you. जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तब जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे थैंक यू
Thank you, audience. We hope to see you all at our next event very soon. Those of you are interested to volunteer and receive updates regarding further events, please email us at vandemataram@smil.iitm.ac.in